Venezuela, a land blessed with vast oil reserves, had long been considered a paradox. Despite its natural riches, the majority of its people lived in poverty. The discovery of oil in the early 20th century had transformed the nation, turning it into one of the world's leading exporters. However, this wealth had failed to trickle down to the masses. Instead, it fueled corruption and inequality, creating a chasm between the privileged elite and the impoverished majority. For decades, Venezuela had been ruled by a succession of two-party governments. The Acción Democrática and the Comité de Organización Política Electoral Independiente parties alternated power, presiding over a system rife with patronage and cronyism. Disillusionment with this political establishment grew, as did frustration with the enduring poverty and lack of opportunity. The 1980s witnessed a series of economic crises, further exacerbating social tensions. The implementation of neoliberal economic policies, often dictated by international organizations, led to austerity measures that hit the poor hardest. By the late 1980s, Venezuela was a powder keg of discontent. The gap between rich and poor had widened to an alarming degree. Basic services like healthcare and education were crumbling. The political system seemed incapable of addressing the needs of the people. It was in this context of simmering anger and disillusionment that a young, charismatic military officer named Hugo Chávez emerged, promising a revolution that would upend the established order and deliver a more just and equitable society. Hugo Rafael Chávez Frias was born into a working-class family in the rural plains of Sabaneta Barinas state. His humble beginnings and upbringing in a small village shaped his worldview and fueled his empathy for the poor and marginalized. Chávez's interest in politics and social justice blossomed early on, influenced by the writings of Latin American revolutionaries like Simón Bolívar and Fidel Castro. After graduating from the Venezuelan Military Academy, Chávez embarked on a career in the military. He rose through the ranks, becoming a lieutenant colonel. However, Chávez was no ordinary soldier. He was deeply affected by the poverty and inequality he witnessed in Venezuela. He saw firsthand the corruption within the military and the government. Driven by a desire for change, Chávez formed a clandestine revolutionary group within the army called the Movimiento Bolivariano Revolucionario 200, named after Simón Bolívar and the bicentennial of his birth. Chávez's revolutionary ideals were solidified during his time teaching military history at his former academy. He instilled in his students a sense of patriotism and a belief in social justice, emphasizing the legacy of Bolívar and his vision of a united and independent Latin America. Chávez saw himself as an heir to this Bolivarian legacy, determined to break free from what he perceived as neo-colonial influences and forge a new path for Venezuela. Fueled by growing discontent within Venezuelan society and inspired by his Bolivarian ideals, Chávez, along with the MBR 200, launched a coup attempt against the government of President Carlos Andrés Pérez on February 4, 1992. The coup failed and Chávez was captured and imprisoned. However, his televised address, in which he took responsibility for the uprising and declared por ahora, for now, resonated with millions of Venezuelans who shared his frustration with the status quo. Chávez's imprisonment transformed him into a national figure. His brief speech, broadcast across the nation, struck a chord with the poor and marginalized who saw him as a champion for their plight. The image of this young, charismatic soldier speaking out against corruption and injustice resonated deeply, particularly among the disenfranchised masses who had long felt ignored by the political elite. The failed coup attempt proved to be a turning point in Venezuelan history. It exposed the deep fissures within Venezuelan society and brought to the forefront the simmering anger and frustration of the people. Chávez, though imprisoned, had become a symbol of hope for change. His message, por ahora, hinted at a future struggle, a promise that the fight for a more just and equitable Venezuela was far from over. After spending 2 years in prison, Chávez was pardoned in 1994 by President Rafael Caldera. He wasted no time in capitalizing on his newfound fame and the widespread disillusionment with the political establishment. Chávez embarked on a nationwide tour, rallying support for his vision of a Bolivarian revolution. He promised to break the mold of traditional politics, to empower the poor and to redistribute the nation's wealth more equitably. The 1998 presidential election marked a watershed moment in Venezuelan history. Chávez, running on a platform of radical change and social justice, won a landslide victory, capturing 56% of the vote. His victory was a resounding rejection of the old political order and a testament to the desire for change among the Venezuelan people. Chávez's election victory ignited a sense of hope and expectation among the impoverished masses. They saw in him a savior, a leader who would finally address their needs and give them a voice. Chávez promised to break the cycle of poverty, to improve access to healthcare and education, and to empower the marginalized. His victory represented a seismic shift in Venezuelan politics, the beginning of a new era that promised to reshape the social and political landscape of the nation.